So you're asking us to think about philosophy, and you have Zeno, a character named Zeno, and there are lots of references to philosophy and religion and maybe numerology and the gods, sort of. What is your view of human chance? You know, of
Oh, I do understand. No, that's a very good question, just as it is. But I'm going to answer two things. First of all, why do I make so many wholesale references to philosophy on a racetrack of all places? But I do deeply believe that most of the people I've found interesting in my life have a cosmology and since I'm drawn to people who are of a solitary habit like myself, I'm always interested in what's their philosophy of life, what's their philosophy of the world, how do they think, what do they think is real, who do they think is in control, and do they think there's a plan to all this? I really feel that if we could know their thoughts, or any time I've been privileged to know their actual thoughts, I'm impressed at what an interesting philosophy they might lay out for you, and how poetic at times. And so I give Medicine Ed credit for having a philosophy of that kind. Maggie often thinks about as much as she can con of the philosophies of the other characters. The dog Elizabeth has a philosophy that Tutai tells us all about. They're side by side, but they don't interlock because they don't discuss them. Mm-hmm. We have to know their private points of view in most cases to know about them. Now that really interests me. It's what I love about humanity in general. So that's part of my view of life. Now, what about chance? Maggie, in contrast to the other characters, doesn't really have a coherent philosophy. She says, this one believes this one believes this one believes this, and I believe in nothing. Mm-hmm. But I know how to live other people's lives. On the other hand, she is drawn to the racetrack for the same reason I was drawn to the racetrack, that suddenly she realizes that it's not really about money, that gambling, wanting to bet, is for a lot of people one way to answer this question that they have: am I special to the gods or not? Do they have anything? I mean, I always felt like I had something special in store for me, and now I'm sure I do. I have the 3-horse and the 5 race, and I know I'm going to win. And by God, you do win. You're sure that you are the darling of the gods. And in the 8th race, you bet it on the 2, and you lose everything and $50 more besides. And you say, how could I have thought for a minute? I always knew I was cut out I was doomed from the start. And since I'm really given to that kind of thinking, which is comical and profound maybe both at the same time, I wanted to write a book that would situate me in a place that would perfectly illustrate that human tendency. I mean, I don't feel alone in that, and it's in some ways just simple-minded, and I say almost comical. But I also think that for people who don't have a deep belief structure to support them, they're kind of at the mercy of which kind of luck has impressed them most recently, and that's the point that I'm trying to make.
And all kind of doomed from the start in a way. And one of my favorite lines that Tommy says, again, I think he's such a fascinating character, toward the end of the book when all these horrible things have happened, he asks Maggie, do you think I could be a dancer?
How nice that you like that. That's great.
What were you thinking? What did you have in mind when you have him ask that question? I sort of know what it means to me, but as the writer of the book, why did you have Tommy ask that question?
Well, of course, by this time, Tommy has progressed from just tending towards instability to something well over the line. and he's having a number of unrealistic thoughts. But could we have a higher ideal for someone who loves bodies, loves motion, loves and he knows that the racetrack is over for him. That door is closing whether he likes it or not, and it's just a dream that pops into his mind.
Yeah.
Now,
It's so
I
poignant.
have heard.
It's just wonderful.
I'm so glad that you like it. And well, that was one I wasn't really sure about, but good. Thank you.
For me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
That's
interrupt you.
That's wonderful.
Well, I want to ask you a question about dialect, because as I was reading it, and West Virginia writers are real aware of dialect
Right.
and the dangers and so on. I was doing some work lately and came across a phrase I hadn't seen before that said, using dialect is a strategy of condescension. And I think there are lots of ways that's true. A person who's talking naturally is maybe not even aware they have a dialect. So if you can use a dialect, you're always doing it from some distance. And yet when I read your book, there's nothing that I see that seems condescending. Especially, I think you treat Medicine Ed with great sensitivity, and the way he talks, as I say, dignified. What are your feelings about what's good and what was bad about using dialect to convey character with these four main voices that we hear in the book?
I, by the way, have encountered the same argument. I've also been told that writers shouldn't attempt to represent anybody from any ethnic group or social background other than their own. And I think, first of all, what's the writer's imagination for? I mean, wasn't it really our obligation from the start to figure out a world as we understand it and in some way depict it in its wholeness? And I'm sorry, I'm not going. It's been very important to me to live in a world that had people from different educational and geographical backgrounds from my own. I grew up in Baltimore, a city that's more than half black. I'm going to just vaporize that whole population that had a tremendous influence on me as I was growing up. And the same thing, it wasn't particularly a black population once I was in West Virginia, except on the racetrack, where it was very, very important. And my principal teacher was a black groom in every case. It would be condescending, I suppose, if I thought that dialect speech was ignorant or funny only. But since I deeply admire it, it's not, I wish I could claim it for my own, I suppose, in some way.
Right.
But I find such poetry there, such magic, literally, in some cases. I would feel bereft if I were not allowed to make use of it. What's more, in the case of, say, the African American grooms, who are the principal source of labor on the racetrack when I was working on it, who was going to speak for them? Now, it may be true that it would be better if one black groom had been a genius writer and had written the whole thing, but it didn't happen. And it's a population that's just about gone now. And one of the main reasons I wanted to write about the racetrack was to represent the reality, the poetry, and the pathos of people who worked their whole lives without any prospect of solace in their final
retirement,
years.
no.
Really, there was nothing was provided for them, and eventually, like Medicine Ed, they would be faced with the problem: what am I going to do if I can't work anymore? So, that was more than any other single reason. That was why I set out to write the book. So I could hardly do it without making any reference to a different way of speaking. And And now, I know people from the academic linguistics side of English who feel that it's usually condescending to write I dialect, i.e., that is
Right.
EYE dialect, meaning that you have distorted the spelling in all
Right,
kinds of
phonetically.
ways. And I usually agree about that. But I think selecting phrases, I mean, occasionally you need to change a spelling just to get some amazing formulation preserved, but in general, it's choice of phrase rather than distorting spelling. And you only need to suggest dialect. You don't need to go to the limit of the alphabet to put it across. I think that usually is a mistake. But
Well, yours looks beautiful. I mean, to me, the dialect in your book is beautiful, but I wondered
you. I'm
what you
so
thought
glad.
about and it seemed like you thought it was beautiful. I just wondered what
it's
you thought about
entirely,
the
in my
risks
case,
of-
an act of love, really, I would say.
Well, Silas House, I think, he's a Kentucky writer. I don't know if you've read any of his work, but he too stresses that, the beauty of the dialect, but not presenting it graphical, not representing it visually so much. Tell me again, what was something you're really proud of from the book? Something you think, oh yes, I'm glad I wrote that. Sometimes I don't like writing, but I'm glad I've written. So was there anything in Lord of Misrule that you especially thought, oh,
Well, even
I
when-
really like that?
You know, as I've told lots of people, including you earlier today, there was a period when I just hated this manuscript because I was sick and tired of writing about reckless young women, since my reckless young women hadn't really panned out for me yet as a fictional exercise. But even when I was the most down on the book because of that, I did love Medicine Ed as a character, and I loved all his magic, all his folk magic. That was just so much fun to write. It was fun to research, and there's plenty on folk magical hoodoo practices in the South, in a collection called by a man named Harry Hyatt, I believe. I think Harry Hyatt was probably kind of a racist and maybe overstressed the racial aspect, but still he collected 5 volumes of 1,000 pages each, mimeographed, and they're nothing but transcriptions of talks with people who claimed to be conjurers or root workers or practitioners of magic of one kind or another. And when one reads them, you see that some of the people were certainly somewhat mad their whole lives. Some people who were sure they had second sight from childhood and continued to practice, and they are probably the most convincing in terms of their belief in magic and their belief in what they have seen, what they are able to do. But there are others who approach it in a more practical way, and there are recipes, lots and lots of them. You can find out a whole lot about, if you want to go into business as a practitioner of magic, you'll find out all you need from those books, I guarantee you.
And Medicine Ed always sees that something bad, you don't get the good without paying the price. You know, something bad happens to the horses, don't they, every time? It may win,
at least,
but
you know, even that is not as consistent exactly as he expects
Thinks
it to
it
be.